Echoes of the Silent Saint. Chapter 1, Summons from Terra. Sister Verity watched as the Medici servitor applied the final sutures to the guardsman's wound. The man's face contorted in pain despite the numbing agents, but he made no sound. A soldier of the Imperium understood suffering was merely service to the Emperor in another form. "The Emperor protects," she stated, making the sign of the aquila over the freshly sealed wound. "But a hospitaler's needle helps," the guardsman managed through gritted teeth, attempting a smile that looked more like a grimace. Verity didn't return the smile. 15 years of service in the Order of the Cleansing Water had stripped away such casual expressions. Instead, she nodded curtly, her eyes already moving to the next bed in the field Medici tent, where a trooper with degree Prometheum burns waited. The heavy canvas flap of the tent entrance parted, admitting both the caustic dust of Heretical Prime and an armored figure in the black power armor of the Order. Sister Superior Augusta's face was partially concealed by her helm, but the disapproval in her eyes was unmistakable. "Sister Hospitaller," Augusta's voice carried the weight of command. "Your presence is required at the command pavilion. Canoness Drusilla has received communication from the ecclesiarchy. You are relieved of your duties here." Verity froze, syringe of blessed analgesic poised above the burn victim's ravaged arm. "The wounded will be tended by Sisters Mercy and Grace," Augusta interrupted. "This takes precedence." Without another word, the Sister Superior turned and exited the tent, clearly expecting immediate compliance. Verity quickly administered the injection to the burned guardsman, whispering a brief prayer of pain easing before stripping off her blood-stained gloves and surgical apron. "Emperor, guide your hands in my absence," she instructed the two junior hospitallers who had appeared at the mention of their names, before following Augusta into the blinding light of Heretian's dual suns. The command pavilion stood at the center of the imperial encampment, its white marble cloth walls a stark contrast to the utilitarian gray of the surrounding military tents. Inside, the temperature dropped noticeably thanks to cooling units that hummed softly in the background, a luxury justified by the sensitive communications equipment housed within. Canoness Drusilla stood before a hololithic display of the current campaign, her power armor gleaming with fresh polish, despite 3 months of active combat operations. Unlike many commanders of the Adepta Sororitas, Drusilla retained a cold beauty that seemed untouched by the decades of warfare she had experienced. Her only concession to age was the single streak of silver that ran through her otherwise raven-black hair, worn in a tight braid that hung precisely to the small of her back. "Sister Verity," the canoness acknowledged without looking up from the display, "your combat Medici skills will no longer be required on Heretical Prime." Verity knelt, head bowed, as protocol demanded. "I live to serve the Emperor's will, canoness. Have I failed in my duties?" "On the contrary," Drusilla finally turned, studying Verity with eyes the color of frostbite. "Your record is exemplary. That is why you have been selected for a matter of delicate inquiry." She gestured to a data slate on the command table. Verity rose and approached, noting the inquisitorial seal that flashed briefly before being replaced by the more familiar iconography of the Adeptus Ministorum, the ecclesiarchy. Approximately 9 months ago, reports began emerging from the shrine world of Sanctus Lux regarding a so-called living saint, Drusilla explained, her tone making it clear what she thought of such claims. "A young woman, reportedly mute, who communicates through what witnesses describe as the Emperor's voice directly in their minds." Verity skimmed the data slate, taking in reports of miraculous healings, prophetic visions, and even claims of Imperial Guard units finding unexpected victories after receiving the Silent Woman's blessing. The ecclesiarchy has not recognized any new living saints since the Celestine Crusades, Verity observed carefully. Precisely, Drusilla agreed. Yet thousands flock to this silent saint. Pilgrims, soldiers, even planetary governors. The Cardinal of Ultima Segmentum is concerned about potential heresy, masquerading as miracle, and they request the Sisters of Battle to investigate. Verity frowned. Surely this is a matter for the Ordo Hereticus. A tight smile appeared on the canoness's face. Perceptive as always, Sister Verity. Yes, typically the Inquisition would handle such matters. However, the situation requires subtlety. An inquisitorial presence might drive any heresy underground before it can be properly identified and purged. She tapped a command into the hololithic display, which shifted to show a serene, pale-faced woman dressed in simple white robes. Her eyes were closed in the image, her hands open at her sides in an attitude of peaceful acceptance. The Silent Saint, Drusilla introduced, or so her followers call her, no name recorded, no official documentation. She simply appeared at the Cathedral of Divine Light approximately 10 months ago, and has not spoken a single word since. Verity studied the image carefully. The woman appeared young, perhaps 20 standard Terran years, with a peculiar luminescence to her skin that might have been a trick of the light or something more unusual. Something about her features struck Verity as vaguely familiar, though she couldn't place why. "You are to travel to Sanctus Lux," Drusilla continued. "Your cover will be as a hospitaller sent to study the supposed miraculous healings from a medical perspective. Your true mission is to determine whether this silent saint represents genuine imperial miracle or dangerous heresy. I am no inquisitor canoness," Verity pointed out. "My training is in field medicine and combat support. Before you took your vows with our order, you were an interrogator with the Adeptus Arbites," Drusilla countered. "Your skill at discerning truth from falsehood is documented in your service record. Additionally, your medical expertise provides the perfect pretense for close examination of the supposed miracles." Verity couldn't argue with the logic, though she wondered how deeply Drusilla had investigated her past. The years before she joined the sororitas were not something she discussed. "You will not be without support," Drusilla added. "The Adeptus Mechanicus has expressed interest in this matter. A Magos Biologist named Thorn will accompany you, ostensibly to document the physiological aspects of the healings. The Mechanicus involves itself in matters of faith." Verity couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. Drusilla's expression hardened. "The Mechanicus involves itself in matters of potential psychic manifestation disguised as imperial miracle. They have their own concerns about this silent saint. Concerns which happen to align with ours for the moment." She handed Verity a small, ornate key. "This will open a secure compartment aboard the transport vessel. Inside, you'll find additional briefing materials and specialized equipment for your investigation. You depart in 3 hours." "So soon?" Verity couldn't help but ask. "Reports indicate escalating phenomena around the Silent Saint. Phenomena that cannot wait for a more convenient battlefield lull." The canoness's tone made it clear the discussion was over. "You are the closest qualified sister with the necessary background. The Emperor has placed you here for his purpose." Verity bowed her head, accepting both the mission and the implied theological interpretation. "As the Emperor wills it." "What of the Silent Saint herself? Am I to question her directly?" "Your primary objective is observation and assessment. Report your findings through the secured Vox channels detailed in your briefing materials." Drusilla paused, something unidentifiable flashing across her features. "However, should you determine definitive evidence of heresy, you are authorized to take more direct action." The implication was clear. If the Silent Saint proved false, Verity might be called upon to execute imperial justice personally, away from the scrutinizing eyes of the Inquisition or even the ecclesiarchy itself. This wasn't merely an investigation. It was potentially an assassination mission disguised as one. Understand, Sister Verity, Drusilla continued, her voice lowered despite the secure environment. There are political dimensions to this matter that extend beyond simple questions of faith. Cardinal Winston of Sanctus Lux has already embraced this silent saint as genuine. The planetary governor refers to her in official communications. If heresy exists, it has already infected the highest levels of imperial authority in that system. Verity felt the weight of the mission settling onto her shoulders. This was far beyond tending wounds on a battlefield. The spiritual health of an entire sector might hang in the balance. "I shall not fail the Emperor or our order," she stated firmly. "See that you don't." Drusilla turned back to the hololithic display, effectively dismissing her. "The Emperor protects those who protect his Imperium from falsehood, Sister Verity. Remember that in the days ahead." 3 hours later, Verity stood in the landing bay of the orbital station above Heretical Prime, watching as servitors loaded the last of the medical supplies onto the sleek, gunmetal-gray transport vessel that would carry her to Sanctus Lux. Her personal belongings were minimal. The Sisters of Battle traveled light, owning little beyond their armor, weapons, and the tools of their specific calling. "Sister Hospitaller Verity of the Order of the Cleansing Water, I presume." The voice was distinctly mechanical, modulated through what had to be at least 3 separate Vox filters to produce its peculiar harmonics. Verity turned to find herself facing a tall figure in the deep crimson robes of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Where a human face should have been, there was instead a complex array of lenses, sensors, and breathing apparatus, all framed by a hood that cast shadows over the few remaining organic components visible. "Magos biologus thorn," Verity greeted, making the sign of the cog, a courtesy to the Mechanicus that few outside their order bothered with. The Magos's head tilted slightly, perhaps in appreciation of the gesture. "Your genetic profile indicates above-average analytical capabilities and a statistically unusual capacity for objective evaluation. These are favorable attributes for our assigned task. The Canoness indicated you have an interest in the Silent Saint's purported healing miracles." Verity prompted, curious about the Mechanicus angle on this mission. "The Omnissiah's universe operates according to definable parameters," Thorn replied, mechanical tendrils extending briefly from beneath the crimson robes before retracting again. "Phenomena that appear to contravene these parameters warrant investigation, particularly when psychic activity is a statistical probability." Verity nodded, understanding the subtext. The Mechanicus suspected the Silent Saint was a psyker, a witch, using forbidden powers while masquerading as divinely inspired. Such deceptions were among the most dangerous forms of heresy, as they corrupted faith itself. "Our transport appears ready," she observed as the loading ramp retracted and warning lumens began to flash around the vessel. Indeed, a journey of approximately 73 standard hours awaits, accounting for current warp conditions. The Magos moved toward the boarding ramp with surprising grace for one so extensively augmented. "I have prepared a laboratory section within the vessel for preliminary analysis of the data we possess. Your insights would be valuable." It was as close to a friendly overture as one could expect from the Mechanicus. As Verity followed Thorn onto the transport, she found herself grateful for the company, mechanical though it might be. The mission ahead promised to be complex, politically fraught, and potentially dangerous. Above all, it would require discernment, the ability to distinguish true divine intervention from clever fakery or, worse, demonic deception. In her years as a hospitaller, Verity had witnessed both genuine miracles and the darkest heresies disguised as faith. As the transport's engines ignited, propelling them away from Heretical Prime and toward the mysteries of Sanctus Lux, Sister Verity uttered a silent prayer. Emperor, guide my eyes to see your truth, my mind to know your will, and my hands to carry out your judgment should it be required. The mission to uncover the truth behind the silent saint had begun. Chapter 2, Sanctus Lux. The world of Sanctus Lux appeared in the viewport like a pearl suspended in the void. Its atmosphere tinged with a pink-gold hue from twin moons rich in specific mineral deposits that caught and refracted sunlight in distinctive ways. As their transport descended, Sister Verity observed the landscape transform from abstract patterns to recognizable features. Vast cathedral complexes, ornate shrine cities, and between them, the agricultural lands that supported the planet's primarily religious function. Sanctus Lux had been a shrine world since the early days of the Imperium's expansion, though its importance had waxed and waned with the tides of imperial politics and the vagaries of warp travel conditions. Currently, it enjoyed a period of relative prominence, serving as the spiritual center for nearly 40 surrounding systems. Energy readings show elevated thalamic resonance patterns consistent with intensive prayer activity, noted Magos Thorn, who had spent most of the journey analyzing data rather than engaging in conversation, significantly higher than baseline expectations for a Class II shrine world. Verity glanced at the readouts on the Magos' portable cogitator. The complex graphs meant little to her, but she recognized the implications. The Silent Saint has drawn increased pilgrim traffic then. Pilgrim numbers have increased by approximately 273.8% in the past 6 months, Thorne confirmed, correlating with reported miracle incidents. Their craft banked, circling toward the designated landing zone at the edge of the primary shrine city Lux Contemplatio. From this altitude, Verity could see rivers of humanity flowing through the streets, literal processions of pilgrims moving between sacred sites, their paths forming complex patterns like the circulation of blood through a living organism. Remember our cover story, Verity reminded, though she suspected the Magos needed no such prompting. We are here to document the medical aspects of the reported healings. Nothing more. Deception protocols engaged, Thorne replied with what might have been the Mechanicus equivalent of dry humor. I shall restrict visible scanning activities to those consistent with standard biology's research parameters. The transport settled onto the landing pad, with a gentle thrum of anti-grav generators. As the ramp extended, Verity was struck by the sweet, cloying scent of incense that permeated the air even here at the spaceport, evidence of the thousands of sensors burning throughout the city. Sister Hospitaller, Magos Biologies, a figure in the simple brown robes of an ecclesiarchy attendant approached, bowing deeply. I am Acolyte Petriv, assigned to guide you during your blessed visit to Sanctus Lux. Confessor Marcus sends his regrets that he could not greet you personally. He attends to the Silent Saint this morning. Verity nodded, studying the young man. He appeared sincere in his devotion, his eyes clear and earnest beneath a mop of sandy hair. No obvious signs of heretical influence, though such things were often well disguised. The confessor is most gracious to provide guidance, she replied formally. Our mission on behalf of the Ordo Hospitaller requires access to those who claim healing through the Silent Saint's intervention. Of course, Petriv nodded enthusiastically. Confessor Marcus has arranged accommodations for you at the Hospice of Divine Mercy, where many of the healed rest and give testimony. You'll have complete access to conduct your examinations. And the Silent Saint herself, Verity inquired. We will need to observe her methods directly. Petrev's expression turned reverent, almost dreamy. The blessed Silent One grants audience to pilgrims daily at the hour of contemplation. The confessor has ensured you will have a place tomorrow. Today, she is in deep communion with the Emperor and sees no one save her closest attendants. Convenient, Verity thought but did not say. Instead, she nodded acceptance of the arrangement. We will require immediate access to recorded data regarding previous healing incidents. Thorn interjected, mechanical tendrils extending slightly from beneath his robes in what Verity had come to recognize as a sign of interest or eagerness. Yes, yes, all has been prepared, Petrev assured them, though he took an instinctive step back from the Magos' mechanical appendages. Transport awaits to convey you to the hospice. Your equipment has already been transferred. During the journey through the crowded streets of Lux Contemplatio, Verity observed the city with a professional eye. Unlike many imperial worlds where desperate poverty existed alongside grotesque opulence, Sanctus Lux displayed a remarkably uniform level of modest prosperity. The buildings, while ornate in their religious iconography, were well maintained without being ostentatious. The citizens appeared well-fed and healthy, their clothing simple but clean and whole. "A world in harmony," she murmured, half to herself. "A statistical anomaly," Thorn countered quietly. Shrine worlds typically display greater socio-economic stratification, with clergy at the apex and a substantial underclass of service workers at the base. Perhaps the Silent Saint's influence extends beyond individual healings, Petrev offered, having overheard their exchange. Many say her presence brings clarity of purpose. Those who might normally fight over resources instead find themselves compelled to cooperation. Verity exchanged a glance with Thorn. Such influence over behavior patterns was potentially more concerning than physical healings. It suggested mental manipulation on a mass scale, something well beyond the powers of faith alone. The Hospice of Divine Mercy occupied a sprawling complex at the heart of a medical district. Unlike most imperial medical facilities, with their utilitarian designs and emphasis on efficiency over comfort, this building featured soaring arches, stained glass windows depicting scenes of the Emperor's mercy, and gardens where patients in various stages of recovery sat or walked in contemplation. Confessor Marcus awaited them in the hospice's main atrium, a tall, lean man with a shaved head and the distinctive facial tattoos of the Ministerum's contemplative order. His robes were simple but made of high-quality materials, and the ecclesiarchy symbols he wore appeared to be genuinely ancient artifacts rather than replicas. "Sister Verity, Magos Thorn," he greeted them, making the sign of the Aquila. "The Emperor's light shines upon your arrival. I trust your journey was without incident." "We are grateful for your welcome, Confessor," Verity replied formally. "The Order of the Cleansing Water sends blessings and gratitude for your cooperation in our study." Marcus smiled, though the expression didn't quite reach his eyes. "The Silent Saint's gifts must be documented properly, so that all the Imperium might know of the Emperor's continued grace. I have assembled 12 patients who have experienced healing within the past month. Their conditions ranged from terminal carcinoma to battlefield trauma that our finest medici had declared untreatable. We shall require complete medical documentation from before and after these supposed healing incidents," Thorn stated, his mechanical voice causing several nearby attendants to start in surprise. If the confessor was offended by the Magos' skeptical tone, he showed no sign. "Of course, all records have been prepared for your examination. We have nothing to hide from those who seek the Emperor's truth." "And biometric scanning of the patients?" Verity asked. "Some of our equipment is quite specialized. Anything that does not cause undue distress to those who have already suffered greatly," Marcus agreed, though Verity noted the careful limitation. "Now, I imagine you wish to begin your work immediately, but perhaps a brief moment of reflection in our chapel first, to center yourselves after your journey." The suggestion was presented as optional, but carried the weight of expected protocol. Verity nodded acquiescence. A moment of prayer would be welcome. The chapel was a modest space compared to the grand cathedrals elsewhere in the city, but exquisitely designed to create an atmosphere of intimate communion. Surfaces of polished stone reflected candlelight in a way that made the space seem both smaller and larger than it actually was. A clever architectural trick that Verity had seen employed in other sacred spaces throughout the Imperium. As they knelt at the simple altar, Verity observed Thorn from the corner of her eye. The Magos made the expected gestures of devotion, but she noticed the subtle movement of optical implants beneath his hood, scanning, recording, analyzing the chapel and its occupants. "The silent saint first appeared in this very chapel," Confessor Marcus informed them softly. "9 months ago during morning prayers. No one saw her enter. She was simply present, kneeling at this altar when the dawn light came through the eastern window." "She spoke then?" Verity asked. "Never," Marcus shook his head. "Not a single word has passed her lips since her arrival. Yet all who come before her hear her wisdom directly in their minds. The voice of the Emperor, transmitted through her blessed form." "Telepathic communication," Thorn observed, not bothering to disguise the clinical assessment. "A documented phenomenon among certain categories of psycher." Marcus smiled thinly. "The Adeptus Mechanicus always seeks technological explanations for the divine Magos. But consider, would not the master of mankind use all tools at his disposal to communicate with his people? The silent saint has been tested extensively by Sanctus Lux's Scholastia Psychana representatives. She registers as psychically dormant." Verity filed this information away. If true, it contradicted the most obvious explanation for the silent saint's abilities. But test results could be falsified, or the tests themselves could be flawed. "We shall review those test results as well," she stated. It wasn't a request. "Naturally," Marcus agreed. After a moment of silence, he rose from his kneeling position. "Now I shall leave you to your work. Acolyte Petriv will attend to your needs and show you to the examination chambers we have prepared. Tomorrow at the hour of contemplation, you shall meet the silent saint yourselves." After the confessor departed, Verity and Thorn were shown to an extensive suite of rooms that had been converted into medical examination facilities. The equipment provided was surprisingly comprehensive for a shrine world, including several pieces of diagnostic technology that Verity recognized as being uncommonly advanced. "Substantial resources have been allocated to this hospice," Thorn observed as they surveyed the facilities. "Equipment specifications exceed Imperial standard by approximately 47.6% for a world of this classification. Someone is investing heavily in the silent saint's reputation," Verity agreed, examining a molecular recomposition unit that would not have been out of place in a high-tier Scola Medici. "The question is why?" They spent the remainder of the day examining patients and reviewing medical records. To Verity's practiced eye, the healings appeared genuine. Individuals who had suffered from conditions ranging from advanced radiation poisoning to traumatic amputation now showed complete recovery. The medical documentation was thorough and appeared authentic, with verification stamps from multiple recognized Imperial Medici institutions. By evening, Verity found herself troubled by the lack of obvious fraud. She had expected to find evidence of deception, records altered, symptoms faked, patients coached. Instead, she found herself facing what appeared to be genuine medical miracles. "Your assessment," she asked Thorne as they reviewed the day's findings in their private quarters after the hospice had settled into night cycle. The Magos's optical units dimmed slightly as he processed. The physiological changes in the subjects are genuine. Cellular restructuring, genetic repair, neurological pathways reformed. The mechanisms, however, remain unexplained by standard imperial medical science. Could it be genuine divine intervention? Verity asked, partly to gauge the Magos's reaction. The Omnissiah's ways remain partially cryptic even to his most devoted servants. Thorne replied carefully, a remarkably diplomatic answer from a member of the Mechanicus. However, historical analysis of confirmed imperial miracles shows distinct energy signatures and pattern formations. The evidence here is inconclusive. Verity moved to the window, looking out over the sleeping city with its countless votive candles and prayer lamps, creating a tapestry of light in the darkness. Tomorrow we meet the silent saint herself. Perhaps then we'll find more concrete answers. I have prepared specialized scanning equipment, Thorne informed her, calibrated to detect even-minute evidence of warp influence or psychic manipulation. If the Silent Saint employs such methods, we will identify them. And if she doesn't? Verity asked, the question that had been growing in her mind throughout the day finally taking shape. What if she is exactly what they claim? A genuine sign of the Emperor's continued intervention in human affairs. Thorne's mechanical features couldn't express emotion, but the slight tilt of his hooded head conveyed thoughtfulness. Then the question becomes not what she is, but why she has appeared at this specific time and place. Divine intervention follows purpose, Sister Verity. The Omnissiah does not deploy resources without strategic objective. The observation struck Verity as both coldly calculating and profoundly insightful. If the Silent Saint was genuine, then her appearance now, in this place, in this time, was no accident. It was a deployment of an imperial asset for a specific purpose. We should review historical records for this region, she decided. See if there's any precedent for miraculous intervention here, or any pattern to the types of pilgrims being drawn to the Silent Saint. Already initiated, Thorne confirmed. Preliminary analysis indicates an unusual historical connection between Sanctus Lux and certain Adeptus Astartes operations during the Horus Heresy. References are fragmentary and heavily redacted. Verity's attention sharpened immediately. Space Marines, which chapter? Not chapter. Legion. The data refers to pre-heresy Legion operations. Most details have been systematically expunged from accessible records. A chill ran along Verity's spine, despite the comfortable temperature of their quarters. Information relating to the original Space Marine legions was among the most restricted in the Imperium. That such connections existed with Sanctus Lux, and potentially with the Silent Saint, elevated their investigation to an entirely new level of significance and danger. We proceed with extreme caution, she decided. Tomorrow, we observe only. No invasive scans, nothing that might alert the Silent Saint or her custodians to our true purpose until we better understand what we're dealing with. Thorne's optical lenses adjusted, focusing more intently on her face. Your behavioral patterns indicate elevated concern. You suspect hostile intent behind the phenomenon. I suspect that we've been given only a fraction of the information we need, Verity replied carefully. And in my experience, when information is deliberately withheld by authorities as high as those who dispatched us, it's because the full truth is considered too dangerous for general knowledge. She moved away from the window, checking that their quarters' privacy field generators were active before continuing. Canoness Drusilla didn't send me here merely to confirm or deny a miracle, Magos Thorne. And I doubt your superiors in the Mechanicus dispatched you simply to document unusual healing phenomena. Correct, Thorne acknowledged after a brief pause. My primary directive involves assessment of potential xenotech or heresiera technology signatures that might explain the anomalous biological manipulations observed. So we both serve masters with hidden agendas, Verity concluded. The question is whether those agendas align or conflict, and how they relate to whatever the Silent Saint truly represents. As night deepened over Sanctus Lux, Sister Verity prepared for sleep with a troubled mind. Tomorrow she would come face to face with the Silent Saint, and perhaps begin to unravel the true purpose behind her mission. As she recited her evening prayers, she found herself adding a private petition for clarity and discernment. In the adjacent chamber, the mechanical sounds of Mago's Thorn's continued work hummed through the wall, a reminder that some allies never truly rested, and that in the Imperium of man, truth was rarely simple and never free from political complication. Chapter 3: The Voice Within. Dawn broke over Sanctus Lux with mathematical precision, the first rays of sunlight perfectly aligned to illuminate the highest spire of the Cathedral of Divine Light. This astronomical alignment was no accident. The entire city had been designed millennia ago to create this effect, a daily reminder of the Emperor's illuminating presence. Sister Verity had risen well before dawn, spending the quiet hours in meditation and preparation. She had donned her formal hospitaler's habit rather than her field medici gear, white robes with the distinctive red trim of her order, and the silver aquila that marked her as a full sister rather than a novice. The outfit conveyed both her authority and her legitimate purpose for examining the Silent Saint, while still allowing her to move freely. Mago's Thorn had apparently not rested at all. When Verity emerged from her chamber, she found him exactly as she had left him the previous evening, surrounded by data scrolls and analysis equipment. "Magos, have you completed your preparations?" she asked. Thorn's hooded head rotated toward her with mechanical precision. "Affirmative. Scanning equipment has been calibrated to appear as standard medici diagnostic tools. Detection capabilities extend to quantum-level cellular anomalies and psychic resonance frequencies. Remember our agreement," Verity cautioned. "Observation only during this first meeting. We cannot risk alerting the Saint or her handlers to our suspicions." "Acknowledged," Thorn confirmed. "Passive scans only." Acolyte Petrov arrived precisely on schedule to escort them to the cathedral. The young man seemed even more excited than the previous day, practically bouncing with barely contained energy. "You are most blessed," he told them as they traveled through streets already filling with pilgrims. "The Silent Saint rarely grants private audiences, even to officials of your standing. Typically, she sees supplicants only in large groups. The confessor is most gracious to arrange this exception," Verity replied diplomatically. "How long do these audiences typically last?" "It varies with the Silent Saint's strength," Petrov explained. "Communing through the Emperor's will taxes her physical form. Some days she can receive pilgrims for hours. Other days, merely minutes before she must retreat to recover." Convenient, Verity thought again. A built-in explanation for why the Saint might cut short any interaction that became too probing or uncomfortable. The Cathedral of Divine Light lived up to its name. Its exterior was relatively austere by imperial standards, but its interior was a masterpiece of light manipulation. Strategic placement of crystal prisms, reflective surfaces, and carefully positioned apertures created an environment where light seemed to flow like liquid, constantly shifting in patterns that subliminally evoked imperial iconography. Confessor Marcus awaited them in a small antechamber, adorned with ancient tapestries depicting the Emperor's Great Crusade, though Verity noted the conspicuous absence of any primarchs from the scenes, likely a post-heresy revision of the original artwork. "You arrive at an auspicious moment," Marcus informed them. "The Silent Saint has been unusually energetic this morning. She specifically requested your audience when she learned of your arrival." Verity exchanged a quick glance with Thorn. "Requested? I thought she didn't speak." "Not with words," Marcus clarified. "But her guardians have learned to interpret her gestures and expressions. She indicated great interest when informed of an Adepta Sororitas Hospitaller visiting from off-world. This was unexpected information. Verity had assumed their visit would be perceived as routine by the saint and her custodians. Just another imperial delegation coming to verify the reported miracles. That the saint had shown specific interest in her presence suggested either remarkable intuition or prior knowledge. Marcus led them through a series of increasingly ornate chambers, each smaller than the last, until they reached a simple wooden door that seemed out of place amidst the cathedral's grandeur. "The Chamber of Whispers," he explained, his voice dropping to a reverential tone. "So named because those who enter often hear the Emperor's wisdom whispered directly into their minds through his living vessel." He pushed the door open to reveal a surprisingly modest circular room. Unlike the rest of the cathedral, there were no ornate decorations here, no stained glass or gold leaf. The walls were bare stone, worn smooth by age. The floor was polished wood, simple but immaculately maintained. A circular skylight above allowed natural illumination to fall in a perfect pool of light at the chamber's center, where a figure in white knelt in silent prayer. The Silent Saint. Verity's first impression was one of unexpected ordinariness. From the rapturous descriptions she had heard, she had imagined someone of striking beauty or imposing presence. Instead, she saw a young woman of average height and unremarkable features, dressed in simple white robes without adornment. Her hair, a common shade of brown, was arranged in a practical braid that revealed a face neither beautiful nor plain, but somewhere in that vast territory between. Only as they drew closer did Verity notice the unusual qualities. The saint's skin had a subtle luminescence to it, as if light resided just beneath the surface. And when she opened her eyes to acknowledge their presence, Verity was struck by their color, a violet so deep it bordered on black, with tiny flecks of gold that caught the light like distant stars. "Approach," Confessor Marcus instructed softly. "The Blessed One awaits." Verity moved forward with measured steps, Thorn a half-pace behind her. She felt a curious pressure building in her skull as they entered the pool of light, not painful, but noticeable, like the sensation of descending rapidly in an aircraft. The Silent Saint rose gracefully to her feet, regarding them with those extraordinary eyes. Her gaze lingered on Verity for several seconds before shifting to Thorn, where it remained, filled with what seemed like curiosity. Then, without warning, Verity heard a voice in her mind, clear as spoken words but somehow bypassing her ears entirely. "Sister Verity of the Order of the Cleansing Water, you have traveled far to seek truth." Verity managed to keep her expression neutral despite her shock. The voice was feminine, but with harmonics that suggested multiple tones speaking in perfect unison. It carried authority without aggression, certainty without arrogance. "I come to observe and document the miracles attributed to you," Verity replied aloud, watching carefully for the saint's reaction. A gentle smile curved the saint's lips, though she made no sound. "You come seeking heresy, sent by those who fear what they do not understand. This is also truth." Beside her, Verity sensed Thorn's posture stiffen slightly. The saint had just confirmed she knew their true purpose, knowledge she should not possess unless she had been informed by someone in the canoness's confidence, or unless her abilities extended to genuine mind reading. "The Imperium must verify all claims of miracle," Verity responded carefully, "to protect the faithful from deception." "As it should be." The mental voice carried a tone of gentle amusement. I welcome your scrutiny, sister. The Emperor's work invites examination. The saint turned her attention fully to Thorn, her head tilting slightly as she studied his mechanical augmentations. Magos biologus Thorn, your quest for understanding follows different paths, yet arrives at the same destination. The Omnissiah and the Emperor are one, though your kind often forgets this truth. Thorn's voximeter produced a burst of static before he replied. Your knowledge of our designations and purposes was not included in the information provided to your custodians. I know what the Emperor wishes me to know. The saint's mental voice remained serene. Your scanning devices are active despite your agreement with Sister Verity. You seek evidence of deception or technological manipulation. You will find neither, though your instruments will detect anomalies you cannot explain through known science. Verity shot Thorn a sharp look. The Magos had evidently activated his scanning equipment despite their agreement to observe only during this initial meeting. We would understand the mechanism of your healing miracles, Verity said, redirecting the conversation. Those we examined yesterday show genuine biological restoration beyond standard imperial medical capabilities. The saint nodded, her expression warming. I do not heal. The Emperor heals through me. I am merely the vessel through which his mercy flows. My body channels his divine energy into those whose faith opens them to receive it. A measurable energy transfer process. Thorn inquired, mechanical appendages extending slightly from beneath his robes in what Verity now recognized as a sign of intense scientific curiosity. Yes and no, Magos. The saint's mental voice carried a nuance of complexity that would have been difficult to convey through spoken language. The energy exists simultaneously in material and immaterial states. It follows laws your instruments can detect but not fully comprehend. This is the nature of divine power. It intersects with the physical realm but is not bound by its limitations. While they conversed, Verity had been studying the saint carefully. Her movements, expressions, and body language all appeared genuinely human, showing none of the subtle wrongness that often characterized warp entities disguised as humans. The cadence of her mental communications was measured and thoughtful, lacking the manic quality that often afflicted unsanctioned psychers. May I? Verity asked, extending her hand toward the saint, requesting permission to conduct a basic physical examination. The saint nodded her consent, extending her own hand's palm up in a gesture of openness. Verity took the saint's wrist between her fingers, feeling for a pulse. It was present and strong, but with an unusual rhythm, not irregular in a pathological sense, but following a pattern that felt deliberately structured, almost like music translated into a physiological function. More striking was the saint's body temperature. While not uncomfortable to touch, she radiated heat well above normal human baseline, as if an internal furnace burned within her. Your core temperature exceeds standard human parameters, Verity observed. The Emperor's light burns within, came the simple reply. Thorn moved closer, his augmetic sensors whirring softly as they gathered data. Biological anomalies detected across multiple systems. Cellular structure shows signs of extensive modification at the molecular level. My physical form has been reshaped to serve its purpose, the saint acknowledged. What you perceive as anomalies are necessary adaptations to channel the Emperor's will, without being consumed by it. Who reshaped you? Verity asked directly, seizing on this admission. When? Were you born this way or transformed? For the first time, the saint's serenity seemed to falter. A shadow passed across her features, and her mental voice, when it came again, carried an undercurrent of something like sorrow or perhaps pain. I do not remember a before. There is only service, purpose. The memories of my creation are hidden from me, perhaps mercifully so. Confessor Marcus, who had been standing silently near the door, stepped forward with a concerned expression. The Blessed One tires. Perhaps we should continue this examination another time. But Verity pressed on, sensing a critical vulnerability in the saint's seemingly perfect composure. Your arrival here 9 months ago, what preceded it? Where did you come from? The saint's violet eyes clouded, her brow furrowing in concentration or distress. Fragments only, darkness, pain, a laboratory, and then light. The Emperor's voice, directing me to this place, to these people who needed hope. A laboratory, Verity repeated, exchanging a significant glance with Thorn. What kind of laboratory? Imperial. Mechanicus. I cannot. The saint's mental voice suddenly faltered and her physical form swayed slightly. The memories are sealed, protected, not to be accessed. Protected memories suggested sophisticated psychoconditioning or neural blocks, technologies far beyond standard imperial medical practice. Such techniques were primarily the domain of the Inquisition, certain Mechanicus factions, or Space Marines, Verity said suddenly, remembering Thorn's discovery about the historical connection between Sanctus Lux and Astartes' operations during the Heresy era. Does your creation involve the Adeptus Astartes in some way? The effect of this question was immediate and dramatic. The silent saint's eyes widened, her back arched, and a visible tremor ran through her body. For the first and only time, she made an audible sound, a soft gasp that seemed torn from her throat against her will. The mental voice that followed was fragmented, disjointed, as if fighting through layers of blockage. Gene Seed. Primarch, the lost sons must. The Emperor's finest creation. Remember, remember. Suddenly, Confessor Marcus was between them, his face tight with alarm and anger. Enough! You abuse the Blessed One's generosity. She requires rest immediately. We've barely begun our examination, Verity protested, though she was shaken by the saint's reaction. Her response to simple questions about her origins are none of your concern, Marcus cut her off sharply. Your mandate extends to documenting the healing miracles, not interrogating the Emperor's chosen vessel about matters beyond mortal understanding. 2 robed attendants had appeared from a previously unnoticed side door, and were already leading the silent saint away. She went without resistance, though her gaze remained fixed on Verity until the door closed behind her. You overstep your authority, Sister Hospitaller, Marcus continued, his earlier obsequiousness replaced by cold authority. The silent saint's communion with the Emperor is sacred and private. Her personal history before her divine calling is irrelevant to your investigation. On the contrary, Thorn interjected, his mechanical voice cutting through the tension. The biological modifications we have detected require explanation. They bear similarities to certain restricted gene manipulation technologies documented in Mechanicus archives. Technologies similar to those used in the creation of the Adeptus Astartes, perhaps. Verity suggested, watching Marcus's reaction carefully. The confessor's expression didn't change, but Verity noted the slight tightening around his eyes, the momentary pause before he responded. Your imagination exceeds the bounds of reason, sister, he said finally. The silent saint is a miracle of faith, not a product of forgotten technology. Now, I must insist that you leave the cathedral. Return to the hospice and continue your examination of the healed if you wish, but the silent saint will not be available for further questioning until she has recovered. There was little choice but to comply, at least for now. Verity and Thorn allowed themselves to be escorted from the Chamber of Whispers, through the cathedral's winding corridors, and back to the main entrance. The confessor's reaction is statistically significant, Thorn observed quietly as they descended the cathedral steps. Probability of concealing relevant information, 98.7%. More than that, Verity replied under her breath. He was expecting our questions, perhaps not their specific content, but the general direction. He intervened precisely when the saint began to reveal information about her origins. The reference to gene seed and primarchs cannot be coincidental, Thorne added. Such terminology is specific to space marine creation processes. They had reached the cathedral plaza, now crowded with pilgrims awaiting the public audience that would normally have followed their private meeting. Given the saint's apparent distress, Verity wondered if that audience would proceed as scheduled or be canceled. We need access to historical records, she decided. The connection between this world and the Space Marines during the Heresy era, that's the key to understanding what the Silent Saint truly is. Access to such records will be restricted, Thorne pointed out. Given the confessor's reaction, it is unlikely he will grant us permission to explore the cathedral archives. Verity considered their options as they navigated through the crowd. We don't need his permission. Every shrine world maintains historical documentation in multiple locations as a safeguard against loss. There will be records in the planetary governor's archives, the Schola Progenium facilities, possibly even the hospice itself. The hospice records would be most accessible given our current authorized access parameters, Thorne suggested. However, they are also likely to be the most sanitized. We start there anyway, Verity decided. Even sanitized records may contain overlooked details or clues that point us toward more complete information. As they made their way back to the hospice, Verity found herself troubled by the encounter with the Silent Saint. She had come expecting to find evidence of fraud, heresy, or warp influence. Instead, she had discovered something potentially more disturbing. What appeared to be genuine Imperial technology applied to human modification in ways that should have been impossible outside the creation of Space Marines. The implications were staggering. If the Silent Saint had indeed been created using adaptations of gene seed technology, the sacred processes reserved exclusively for male candidates to the Adeptus Astartes, then her existence represented not merely a miracle, but potentially a radical reinterpretation of the Emperor's will regarding his most elite warriors. No wonder both the Ecclesiarchy and the Mechanicus had sent representatives to investigate. The theological and technological implications threatened to shake the foundations of imperial doctrine. But one question remained foremost in Verity's mind as they reached the hospice. Who had created the Silent Saint? And why now, in this particular place with its mysterious historical connection to the Heresy era? As she and Thorne entered the hospice's main doors, a servitor approached with a sealed message scroll bearing the insignia of the Ecclesiarchy, a summons from the planetary governor requesting their presence at a formal reception that evening. It appears our investigation has attracted attention at the highest planetary levels, Verity observed, passing the scroll to Thorne. A surveillance opportunity, the Magos noted. High-ranking officials often speak more freely in social contexts where alcohol and status signaling behaviors reduce communication inhibitions. Precisely, Verity agreed. We'll attend and listen carefully. But first, we have archives to explore. The path to truth about the Silent Saint had begun to reveal itself. A path that appeared to lead back into the darkest era of imperial history, when brother fought brother, and the Emperor's greatest creations turned against him. Whatever they discovered in those archives would determine not only the fate of their mission, but potentially the future of imperial doctrine itself. And somewhere in the cathedral above them, a young woman with violet eyes and forgotten origins continued to bear the Emperor's voice in her mind, or so she believed. The question of whose voice truly guided the Silent Saint remained to be answered. Chapter 4. Buried History. The hospice archives occupied a sprawling subterranean complex beneath the main medical facility, a labyrinth of climate-controlled chambers filled with data slates, vellum scrolls, and ancient leather-bound tomes. The sheer volume of information was overwhelming, seemingly designed to discourage casual research through its intimidating vastness. Inefficient storage methodology, Thorne observed as they navigated the dimly lit corridors between archive sections. No evidence of standard Mechanicus cataloging protocols. That's likely intentional, Verity replied, her voice low despite their apparent solitude. Information is easier to hide when the organizational system is arcane or inconsistent. They had been granted access to the archives by the hospice's chief medici, a hunched, elderly man named Dorian who seemed genuinely eager to assist their research into the saints' healing miracles. Whether through naivety or deliberate misdirection, he had shown them only to the medical records section, but Verity had noted the layout of other archive chambers during their escort through the complex. We should divide our efforts, she decided. You focus on the medical data, look for anomalous cases predating the saint's arrival, anything that might establish a pattern. I'll search for historical records relating to this world's connection to the Astartes. Thorne's optical lenses adjusted, focusing on her face. The most relevant historical data will not be in the medical section. You propose unauthorized access to restricted archives. I propose a thorough investigation, as authorized by the canonists, Verity countered smoothly, the parameters of which were not limited to medical records. After a brief pause, Thorne nodded. A technically accurate interpretation. I will maintain presence in the assigned section to avoid raising suspicion. Once the Magos had settled at a data terminal surrounded by stacks of medical journals, Verity made her way deeper into the archives. She moved with the confident purpose of someone exactly where they belonged, nodding to the occasional archive servitor she passed. Such simple deceptions were often the most effective. Most security systems were designed to detect furtiveness rather than misplaced confidence. The historical records section proved to be considerably smaller than the medical archives, and far dustier, suggesting infrequent access. The indexing system was indeed confusing, jumping between chronological, geographical, and thematic organizations seemingly at random. After nearly an hour of increasingly frustrated searching, Verity finally located a section labeled Founding Era Chronicles. The materials here were ancient, actual paper books and scrolls rather than data slates, their bindings cracked with age and discolored by millennia of oxidation. Verity handled them with reverence, both for their age and for the information they might contain. Most appeared to be standard colonization records, atmospheric adjustment logs, population growth statistics, infrastructure development plans. But one slim volume caught her eye, its binding different from the others, made of a material that resembled leather but felt wrong somehow, almost alive under her fingers. The title, stamped in faded gold, read simply The Visitation. The book contained just 17 pages, each filled with a cramped, precise handwriting. The account, written in archaic High Gothic, described the arrival of the Angel's Sons to Sanctus Lux during its early colonization period, approximately 5 millennia ago. Verity's pulse quickened as she translated the ancient text. The angel was a common historical reference to Sanguinius, Primarch of the Blood Angels Legion. If this account was authentic, it described a visit by pre-heresy blood angels to this world. The chronicle detailed how a strike cruiser had arrived without warning, bearing space marines who described themselves as seekers of the sacred blood. They had constructed a facility in the northern mountains, the exact location carefully omitted from the text, where they conducted what the chronicler euphemistically called holy works of genetics. Most disturbing was a passage near the end. They brought with them 9 vessels of crystal, each containing what appeared as crimson tears that moved of their own accord. When questioned by the ecclesiarch regarding the nature of these substances, their leader, who named himself only as apothecary, spoke these words: "These are the final tears of our Father, shed before his ascension to the Emperor's side. In them resides the future salvation of our line, to be awakened only in mankind's darkest hour." Verity read the passage twice, her mind racing with implications. The crimson tears sounded remarkably like preserved gene seed or some related biological material, and if it truly originated from Sanguinius himself, the heretical possibilities were staggering. Space Marine gene seed was sacred, its lineage carefully preserved, and its application restricted to male candidates who met stringent criteria. If someone had attempted to apply Primarch genetic material to create something like the Silent Saint, a female vessel for what sounded like modified gene seed, it would represent a radical departure from 10,000 years of imperial doctrine. She carefully photographed each page using a small pic capturer disguised as a devotional medallion, standard equipment for sisters sent on investigative missions, before returning the volume to its place. As she turned to leave the historical section, a shadow moved at the periphery of her vision. "A fascinating choice of reading material, Sister Verity." The voice came from behind a row of shelving. Confessor Marcus stepped into view, his expression unreadable in the dim archive lighting. How long he had been observing her was impossible to determine. "Confessor," Verity acknowledged, keeping her voice steady despite the surge of adrenaline. "I was researching the historical context of miraculous manifestations on Sanctus Lux. Context often illuminates present phenomena." "Indeed it does," Marcus agreed, moving closer. "Though one must be careful not to confuse historical accounts with truth. Many of our oldest chronicles contain metaphorical language, allegories that were never meant to be interpreted literally, like references to the angels' sons and vessels of crystal," Verity suggested, watching his reaction. Marcus's expression remained carefully neutral, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "Precisely. Religious imagery from an earlier, less enlightened age of the Imperium, before proper theological codification." "Of course," Verity conceded diplomatically. "Though as a hospitaller, I'm particularly interested in the biological aspects of miracles. The medical archives contain extensive documentation of spontaneous healing throughout this world's history. Sanctus Lux has always been blessed by the Emperor's special attention," Marcus stated. "The Silent Saint is merely the most recent manifestation of his divine favor." "The most powerful manifestation, certainly," Verity observed. "Her abilities seem to exceed those documented in previous miraculous events, almost as if she represents an evolution of the phenomenon." The word choice was deliberate, and Marcus's minute flinch confirmed it had struck home. Evolution was a concept treated with suspicion in imperial doctrine, too closely associated with mutation and the insidious influence of chaos. "The Emperor's works follow his own timeline, not ours," the confessor replied after a moment's pause. "We are reminded that his plans unfold over millennia beyond mortal understanding. A convenient perspective when questions arise," Verity noted, unable to entirely suppress her skepticism. Marcus's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Faith often appears convenient to those who struggle with it, sister." He gestured toward the archive exit. "The hour grows late. I believe you and the Magos are expected at the planetary governor's reception this evening. It would be unfortunate to keep such an august personage waiting." The dismissal was clear, and pushing further would only heighten the confessor's suspicions. Verity nodded acquiescence and allowed Marcus to escort her back to the main archive entrance, where Thorn waited, his mechanical form perfectly still among the scrolls and data slates. "Did your research yield enlightenment, Magos?" Marcus inquired with artificial pleasantness. "Insufficient data for conclusive analysis," Thorn replied, his mechanically modulated voice giving no hint of whatever he might have discovered. "Further investigation is required." "Tomorrow, perhaps," Marcus suggested. "For now, your presence is required elsewhere." As they were escorted from the archives and back to their quarters to prepare for the evening's reception, Verity and Thorn maintained a careful silence, both aware that the confessor's unexpected appearance in the archives was unlikely to be coincidental. Only when they had returned to their quarters and activated the privacy field generators did Verity share what she had discovered. "Blood angels," Thorn repeated after she had finished her report. "Pre-heresy era involvement with genetic experimentation on this world. Probability of connection to the Silent Saint, 89.6% based on available data." "What did you find in the medical archives?" Verity asked. Thorn's optical units dimmed slightly as he accessed his internal data storage. "Three significant anomalies. First, a pattern of enhanced healing capabilities documented in certain bloodlines indigenous to this world, subtle but statistically relevant across 27 generations. Second, periodic reports of individuals manifesting limited telepathic abilities, all of whom were subsequently collected for specialized training by the ecclesiarchy. Third, and most relevant, references to a sacred bloodline program in sealed medical files that I was able to access through Mechanicus override protocols." "A breeding program," Verity suggested, the implications chilling. "Affirmative. Though heavily encrypted, the accessible data suggests selective breeding across centuries, focused on preserving specific genetic markers. The program's stated purpose was preparation of suitable vessels for the Emperor's return." Verity paced the small chamber, piecing together the emerging picture. "They've been preparing bloodlines for compatibility with something. The Crimson Tears mentioned in the historical account, perhaps, waiting for the right genetic match to create their Silent Saint. The timing is also significant," Thorn added. "The Silent Saint's appearance coincides with a period of unprecedented instability in the Imperium. The fall of Cadia, the formation of the Great Rift, the return of the Primarch Robout Guilliman. Mankind's darkest hour," Verity quoted from the ancient text. "The Chronicle said these genetic materials were to be awakened only in mankind's darkest hour. The current planetary leadership must have deemed these conditions sufficient to activate whatever was stored here millennia ago," Thorn concluded. "The question remains, does this represent faithful execution of ancient orders from loyal space marines, or the culmination of a heretical plot?" It was the central question, and one Verity still couldn't answer with certainty. If the Blood Angels had indeed left genetic material on this world before the heresy, their intentions might have been pure. But 5,000 years was ample time for corruption, misinterpretation, or deliberate perversion of the original purpose. "The planetary governor may have answers," she decided. Or at least, his reaction to careful questioning might reveal which scenario is more likely. They spent the remaining time, before the reception, reviewing the information they had gathered and planning their approach. The governor's gathering would be an opportunity to observe the planet's leadership in a less formal setting, and perhaps identify factions or tensions that might be exploited to gain further information. The governor's palace occupied the highest point in Lux Contemplatio, a gleaming structure of white marble and gold that managed to be simultaneously opulent and tastefully restrained. An architectural balance that reflected the unique position of shrine world governance. While technically subservient to the ecclesiarchy in matters of faith, planetary governors maintained secular authority and often walked a delicate line between religious and practical concerns. Verity and Thorn were announced with formal ceremony as they entered the main reception hall, their titles receiving respectful murmurs from the assembled planetary elite. Verity had donned her most formal hospitaller regalia, complete with the silver caduceus medallion that marked her advanced medical training. Thorn, like most Mechanicus adepts, had made no adjustments to his appearance, his red robes and mechanical appendages setting him apart from the ornately attired nobles and clerics. Governor Thelian Calphus was a surprise. Younger than Verity had expected, perhaps 40 standard years, with an athletic build that suggested military background rather than lifelong bureaucracy. He greeted them with practiced charm, his handsome features arranged in an expression of sincere welcome that Verity immediately distrusted. In her experience, politicians who appeared this genuine rarely were. Sister Verity, Mago's Thorn, he welcomed them, making the sign of the Aquila. Your presence honors us. I understand you've been examining our blessed saint's miraculous works. We have, Verity confirmed, though our investigation is still in its preliminary stages. Of course, Calphus nodded. The ecclesiarchy is right to verify such claims thoroughly. We wouldn't want pilgrims traveling here under false pretenses. There was something oddly performative about his agreement, as if he were reciting expected lines rather than expressing genuine sentiment. Verity filed this observation away as the governor continued. I must admit, when reports of the Silent Saint first reached me, I was skeptical myself, he confided, lowering his voice as if sharing a private admission. But having witnessed her works firsthand, well, one cannot deny the Emperor's hand in such matters. You've personally observed these miraculous healings, Thorn inquired. Indeed, Magos. My own cousin suffered from terminal rad poisoning after an accident at our orbital shipyards. 3 different medici teams declared his condition untreatable. The Silent Saint laid hands upon him, and within days, all trace of radiation damage had vanished. Calphus made the sign of the Aquila again. The Emperor provides. A remarkable recovery, Verity acknowledged. Have you noticed any changes in your cousin's behavior or abilities since this healing? The governor's expression flickered briefly, surprise perhaps at the unexpected question. Changes? No, nothing unusual. He's simply grateful to be alive and serving the Imperium once more. And the Silent Saint herself, Verity pressed gently. When did you first become aware of her presence on Sanctus Lux? News reached my office approximately 3 days after her first appearance at the cathedral, Calphus replied. Confessor Marcus brought the matter to my attention personally. At first, we kept knowledge of her restricted to prevent disorder until her divine nature could be confirmed. A wise precaution, Verity agreed. The appearance of a miracle requires careful verification before public announcement. Precisely, Calphus smiled, seemingly pleased by her understanding. Though once the healings began, word spread regardless of official channels. The Emperor's work cannot be contained by mere administrative procedures. Throughout this exchange, Verity had been carefully observing the other attendees, noting who reacted to their conversation and how. One figure in particular had caught her attention, an elderly woman in the ceremonial green robes of the administratum, who watched their interaction with unusual intensity. Excusing herself from the governor with practiced courtesy, Verity made her way across the reception hall toward this observer, collecting a glass of amasic from a passing servitor as cover for her approach. Magister Kyra Ven, if I'm not mistaken, Verity greeted the woman, recalling the name from the reception announcements. The Emperor's blessings upon you. The elderly administrator's eyes narrowed slightly, evaluating Verity with the calculating gaze of one accustomed to political maneuvering. Sister Hospitaller, you honor me with your recognition. I understand you've been examining our silent saint's gifts. Indeed, a fascinating case. The biological aspects alone merit extensive study. Verity sipped her amasic before continuing casually. I understand Sanctus Lux has a long history of unusual phenomena. The archives contain references to events dating back to the founding era. Ven's expression remained neutral, but her fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around her own glass. Our world has always enjoyed the Emperor's special attention, though few records from the founding era survive with any reliability. Yet some do, Verity pressed gently. I came across references to visitors from among the Adeptus Astartes during that period, unusual for a world without strategic military significance. For a moment, Verity thought she had overplayed her hand. Ven's face hardened, and she glanced briefly toward a group of ecclesiarchy officials across the room. But then the administrator leaned closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. The Northern archives contain more complete records than those available to casual researchers. Records that suggest our world's purpose has always been more significant than publicly acknowledged. Northern archives. Verity kept her expression mildly curious despite her intense interest. The Administratum maintains separate record repositories, insurance against loss or selective revision. Ven took a slow sip of her drink, eyes never leaving Verity's face. Those with proper authorization can access facilities not listed in official planetary directories. Before Verity could probe further, Ven straightened suddenly, her manner shifting to formal pleasantry. The Emperor protects, Sister Hospitaller. Do enjoy the reception. Following the administrator's gaze, Verity saw Confessor Marcus approaching through the crowd, his expression pleasant but his eyes watchful. The brief window for candid conversation had closed. Throughout the remainder of the evening, Verity circulated among the planetary elite, gathering fragments of information and impression. The silent saint was spoken of with universal reverence, yet Verity detected subtle differences in how various factions described her significance. The ecclesiarchy representatives emphasized her role as a vessel for the emperor's will. Military officials focused on her strategic importance in rallying imperial forces in neighboring systems. The administratum personnel, like Ven, seemed most concerned with her historical context and precedent. These differences suggested no unified conspiracy, but rather multiple groups attempting to leverage the saint's appearance for their own agendas. A common enough scenario when miraculous events intersected with political reality. As the reception drew to a close, Governor Calphus approached them once more, this time with a more specific invitation. Sister Verity, Mago's Thorn, before you conclude your investigation, I would be honored if you would witness the Silent Saint's public blessing ceremony tomorrow. It occurs only once per month and provides the most complete demonstration of her divine gifts. His smile was perfect, practiced, yet somehow never reaching his eyes. You'll observe phenomena that even the most skeptical minds cannot easily dismiss. We would be most interested in such an observation opportunity, Thorn replied before Verity could speak, particularly if it involves multiple simultaneous healing events. Oh, it's far more than healing, Calphus assured them, lowering his voice conspiratorially. The Silent Saint communes with the Emperor directly during these ceremonies. The wisdom she shares. It has guided planetary policy through several recent crises. Some say she can glimpse fragments of the future itself. Verity maintained a neutral expression, despite the alarm bells ringing in her mind. Prophecy was among the most dangerous claimed miracles, too easily confused with warp-tainted divination, or worse, the manipulations of entities that existed outside normal time. "We shall certainly attend," she assured the governor. "Our evaluation would be incomplete without witnessing this ceremony." "Excellent," Calphus beamed. "A shuttle will collect you from the hospice tomorrow at the 10th bell. The ceremony begins at noon precisely in the grand amphitheater of divine light." As they departed the reception shortly afterward, Verity and Thorn maintained silence until safely within their private transport back to the hospice. Only when privacy fields confirmed secure did they exchange observations. The administrator, Ven, implied the existence of more complete records in a northern archive facility, Verity reported. She seemed willing to assist our investigation, at least indirectly. Probability of internal political division, 94.2%, Thorn assessed. The governor's mannerisms displayed inconsistencies, suggesting rehearsed responses rather than genuine conviction. Micro-expressions during discussion of the Silent Saint's origins indicated concealment. "And this blessing ceremony tomorrow," Verity added. "The governor was too eager for us to attend. It feels like a performance designed specifically for our evaluation." "Or a test," Thorn suggested, "to determine our reaction to more overt displays of the Silent Saint's abilities." Verity gazed out the transport's window at the city below, its nighttime illumination creating patterns of light and shadow that resembled circuit diagrams, or perhaps the flow of blood through veins. "We need to visit that northern archive before tomorrow's ceremony," she decided. Administrator Ven's hint was deliberate. She wants us to find something there. "Access without official authorization presents significant risk," Thorn cautioned, "particularly given the confessor's apparent surveillance of our activities." "Which is why we won't be going together," Verity determined. "I'll seek out this archive while you continue examining the medical records at the hospice. Your presence there will provide cover for my absence and potentially distract attention from my movements." Thorn's optical lenses focused on her face, mechanical shutters adjusting slightly. "The division of investigation efforts is logical, but increases individual risk parameters." "Some risks are necessary," Verity replied simply. "The truth about the Silent Saint goes deeper than either of our respective organizations anticipated. If she truly represents an adaptation of Space Marine gene seed, particularly Blood Angel's genetic material, the implications extend far beyond this single world." As their transport descended toward the hospice landing pad, both investigators fell silent, contemplating the widening scope of their mission. What had begun as a straightforward evaluation of supposed miracles had evolved into something far more complex, a potential revelation that could affect imperial doctrine at the highest levels. And at the center of it all remained the enigmatic Silent Saint herself, with her violet eyes and fragmentary memories of laboratories and gene seed. Whether divine miracle or sophisticated biological experiment, her existence represented a convergence of faith and science that defied easy categorization. Tomorrow's ceremony would undoubtedly reveal more, but Verity was determined to arm herself with additional information before facing whatever spectacle the planetary authorities had prepared for them. The Northern Archive, if she could locate it, might hold the final pieces of this increasingly troubling puzzle. Chapter 5. Revelation. Pre-dawn darkness still blanketed Sanctus Lux when Sister Verity slipped from the hospice complex. She wore simple pilgrim's robes over her hospitaller habit, a common enough sight in a city perpetually filled with religious visitors that she attracted no particular attention as she made her way through the gradually awakening streets. Administrator Ven's hint about the Northern Archives had been deliberate but frustratingly vague. The northern district of Lux Contemplatio housed dozens of administrative buildings, any of which might contain the records Verity sought. Without more specific directions, locating the correct facility before the morning ceremony would be nearly impossible. Unless, she realized, one looked beyond the obvious. The administratum was notorious for its labyrinthine organizational structure and Byzantine coding systems, but it was also remarkably consistent in certain patterns, particularly how it designated its highest security installations. Throughout the Imperium, facilities containing sensitive historical information were often disguised as mundane record repositories for agricultural or resource management data. Verity made her way to a public information terminal in one of the city's main transit hubs. Such terminals typically contained basic navigational data about government facilities open to authorized citizens. A quick search for agricultural administration yielded 3 facilities in the northern district, one of which bore the designation Historical Crop Yield Analysis Division. The peculiarly specific title, combined with its address in one of the oldest sectors of the city, matched the administratum's typical pattern for disguised high-security archives. It was a reasonable place to start her search. The facility itself proved unremarkable from the outside, a square, functional building of gray stone with the distinctive Coggian skull emblem of the administratum mounted above its main entrance. 2 bored-looking guards in the green and black uniforms of administrative security stood watch, their lasguns held in loose but ready positions. Verity approached confidently, her pilgrim's robe now discarded to reveal her full hospitaller regalia. The guards straightened as she neared, hands tightening slightly on their weapons. "Identify yourself and state your business," the senior guard demanded, his tone professionally neutral. "Sister Verity, Order of the Cleansing Water," she replied, presenting the official documentation provided by Canoness Drusilla. "I am conducting an authorized investigation into the Silent Saint phenomenon at the request of the Ecclesiarchy. Administrator Kyra, Ven suggested your facility might contain relevant historical records." The guards exchanged a quick glance. "We have no record of an appointment, sister," the senior one said carefully. "The matter is time-sensitive," Verity replied. "Perhaps you could vox Administrator Ven for confirmation. I believe she holds sufficient authority to grant access." This was a calculated risk. Ven might deny having suggested the visit, but Verity's instincts told her the administrator had intentionally pointed her toward this facility. The information contained within must be something Ven wanted revealed, but through channels that provided her deniability. After a brief consultation over their vox units, the guards returned with visibly altered demeanors. "Administrator Ven has authorized temporary access to Section 17C," the senior guard informed her. "You will be escorted at all times, and no data copying devices are permitted within the facility." The latter restriction was standard procedure, though it would complicate Verity's task. Fortunately, Sisters of the Order's Hospitaller were trained in medical memorization techniques. The ability to retain complex information with perfect recall, originally developed for battlefield situations where data slates might be damaged or unavailable. The interior of the facility confirmed Verity's suspicions immediately. Despite its mundane exterior, the security measures within were substantial. Biometric scanners, servitor sentries at key junctions, and psychic dampening fields that created a distinctive pressure behind the eyes. These were not the protections one would expect for agricultural records. Her escort, a severe-looking woman in high-ranking administratum robes who had introduced herself only as archivist, led her through a series of increasingly secure checkpoints before finally arriving at a heavily reinforced door marked Section 17C. Pre-Imperial Settlement Patterns. "You have 1 hour," the archivist stated flatly as she pressed her palm to the security panel. "I will wait outside. Nothing leaves this room." The chamber beyond was small and dimly lit, containing a single data terminal and several locked case cabinets built into the walls. As the door sealed behind her, Verity moved immediately to the terminal, which activated at her approach. "Authorization level," the terminal inquired in the flat, artificial tones of a machine spirit. "Ecclesiarchy Investigation Authority, temporary clearance via Administrator Kyra Venn," Verity replied, placing her palm on the authentication plate. The screen flickered, then displayed a simple menu titled Sanctus Lux Special Projects Archive. The categories listed sent a chill through Verity's spine. 1. Sanguine Tier Repository Access Level, Vermilion. 2. Genetic Preservation Initiative Access Level, Gold. 3. Project Messenger Access Level, Black. 4. The Angels Return Protocols Access Level, Vermilion Alpha. Each category represented a level of classification far beyond what should exist on a standard shrine world. Vermilion clearance was typically reserved for inquisitorial operations, while black-level security often involved direct Astartes oversight. Verity selected the first option, Sanguine Tier Repository, fully expecting to be denied access. To her surprise, the terminal processed her request and displayed a series of historical records dating back to the earliest days of Sanctus Lux's colonization. The documents confirmed and expanded upon what she had discovered in the hospice archives. Approximately 5,000 years ago, during the final years before the Horus Heresy, a small contingent of blood angels had indeed visited this world. Led by an apothecary identified only as Brother Amaretto, they had constructed a specialized facility in the northern mountains. The purpose of this facility, clearly stated in the records but seemingly incomprehensible to the scribes who had recorded it, was to preserve the final genetic legacy of the angel, untainted by the flaw that afflicts his sons. Verity's breath caught. The flaw could only refer to the blood angel's genetic curse, the red thirst and black rage that had plagued the chapter since the death of their primarch. These records suggested that Sanguinius himself had provided genetic material, perhaps literally his tears, as the poetic ancient account had described, to be preserved as a fail-safe against the degradation of his legion's gene seed. But the records went further, describing how this genetic material differed from standard Astartes gene seed. Unlike the sacred gene seed implanted in male aspirants, the sanguine tears contain the complete, unmodified genetic pattern of the angel himself. Brother Amaretto explained that this material could potentially be used to create not warriors, but messengers, beings capable of channeling the Primarch's wisdom across vast distances through what he termed the psychic resonance of shared blood. The implications were staggering, not merely a modification of existing gene seed, but the actual, preserved genetic material of a Primarch, intended for a purpose distinctly different from the creation of space marines. This would explain the Silent Saint's unusual abilities, her telepathic powers, her apparent connection to what many would interpret as the Emperor's will. Verity moved to the second category, Genetic Preservation Initiative, which detailed millennia of selective breeding programs designed to create human bloodlines that could potentially accept Primarch genetic material without fatal rejection. The clinical language couldn't disguise the disturbing reality. For thousands of years, the population of Sanctus Lux had been subtly guided toward producing compatible human vessels. The third category, Project Messenger, contained more recent records, the most recent dated just 11 months ago. These documented the successful awakening of the sanguine tears and their introduction to a prepared human host, identified only as Subject Zero, a female from one of the specially cultivated bloodlines. The clinical details of the process were horrific. The subject had undergone extensive surgical modifications, genetic resequencing, and psychic conditioning. Much of her original memory had been deliberately erased to create a blank slate upon which the angel's wisdom might be inscribed. The process had apparently been deemed successful when the subject began manifesting telepathic abilities and reporting visions consistent with the historical personality of the IX Primarch. Verity felt ill as she read the dispassionate accounts of what amounted to the systematic destruction of a human being to create a vessel for genetic material preserved from before the heresy. Whatever the original intent of the blood angels who had left this genetic legacy, the implementation had become something monstrous, a perversion of both imperial doctrine and basic human dignity. The final category, the angels' return protocols, was the most alarming. These documents, some dated within the past month, outlined plans to expand the messenger program to other worlds throughout the sector. Subject Zero, the Silent Saint, was described as merely the first of potentially hundreds of divine messengers who would prepare the Imperium for the angel's return. The entire project appeared to be based on a radical interpretation of ancient blood angels lore, the belief that Sanguinius would someday return to lead humanity alongside the Emperor. While such beliefs existed as fringe elements within imperial cult teachings, this systematic attempt to engineer vessels for a Primarch's consciousness ventured deep into heretical territory. Verity had seen enough. Using the memorization techniques she had been taught, she committed the key details to memory: names, dates, security authorizations that might prove useful. She was about to log off from the terminal when a final document caught her attention, a recent communication signed by Planetary Governor Kalphas himself. The message was addressed to someone identified only as Inquisitor Valkis and referred to growing concerns about unintended side effects in Subject Zero. It mentioned episodes of identity confusion and autonomous action inconsistent with programmed parameters. Most concerning, it referenced blood consumption that had been concealed from official reports but confirmed by direct observation. Verity felt her blood run cold. Blood consumption was a hallmark of the blood angel's genetic curse, the red thirst that drove them to crave the blood of the living. If the Silent Saint was manifesting this trait, it suggested the genetic modifications were breaking down, potentially releasing the very flaw they had been designed to circumvent. Before she could investigate further, a warning chime indicated her allotted time was nearly expired. Reluctantly, she closed the files and cleared the terminal, her mind racing with the implications of what she had discovered. As the archivist escorted her back through the facility's labyrinthine security checkpoints, Verity maintained a carefully neutral expression despite the turmoil of her thoughts. The Silent Saint was neither divine miracle nor simple fraud. She was something far more complex and potentially more dangerous. A genetically engineered hybrid created from Primarch material, manifesting both the gifts and the flaws of Sanguinius's bloodline. And today, in just a few hours, this creation would perform a public blessing ceremony that, according to the governor's boasts, would demonstrate powers far beyond those Verity had witnessed so far. By the time Verity returned to the hospice, the morning was well advanced. Mago's Thorn awaited her in their quarters, his mechanical form perfectly still in a way that might have been mistaken for powered-down status by those unfamiliar with Mechanicus meditation practices. "Your absence was noted," he informed her as she entered. "Confessor Marcus made inquiries regarding your whereabouts. I indicated you were conducting private devotional observations before the ceremony. A plausible explanation, Verity acknowledged, quickly recounting what she had discovered in the Northern archives. Thorn processed this information with mechanical efficiency, his optical lenses adjusting as he cross-referenced it against his own findings. The medical records contain supporting evidence, he confirmed. Genetic abnormalities in specific bloodlines, systematic monitoring of psychic potential across generations. Your discovery completes the analytical framework. The Silent Saint isn't merely a fraud or heretical construct, Verity summarized grimly. She's the product of genetic experimentation with Primarch material, potentially sanctioned by the original Blood Angels Legion, but implemented in ways they may never have intended. Probability of dangerous instability, 92.7%, Thorne calculated. The reference to blood consumption suggests deteriorating control over the genetic modifications. Historical data on failed Astartes creation processes indicates cascade failure as a common outcome, and today's ceremony will put her in contact with thousands of devoted pilgrims, Verity realized. If she loses control, the implications didn't need to be stated aloud. The red thirst, when fully manifested, could transform even disciplined space marines into frenzied killers driven by bloodlust. In a being without their training or conditioning, surrounded by potential victims, we must contact our respective authorities, Verity decided. This situation exceeds our investigation parameters. It requires immediate inquisitorial intervention. Agreed, Thorne concurred. However, our communications may be monitored. Standard encryption protocols are unlikely to be sufficient given the level of security we have observed. Verity considered their options. We attend the ceremony as expected. Observe, but prepare for potential containment action if necessary. Afterward, we can use the governor's private astropathic choir to send encrypted messages. He's unlikely to deny an official ecclesiarchy representative access for a routine report. A logical approach, Thorne agreed. I have prepared specialized neutralizing agents that may prove effective against genetically modified human physiology if intervention becomes necessary. The Magos extended a mechanical appendage, offering Verity a small device that resembled a standard Medikey injector. Adapted from Mechanicus protocols for managing unstable servitor units. Non-lethal but capable of rendering the target unconscious through targeted neural disruption. Verity accepted the device, concealing it within her Hospitaler's medical kit. The weight of it against her side was a grim reminder of how far this investigation had evolved from its original parameters. "The Emperor protects," she murmured, the standard phrase feeling hollow in light of what they had discovered. "Through knowledge and preparation," Thorne added, completing a variant of the phrase common among tech priests. The grand amphitheater of divine light lived up to its name, a colossal structure of white stone and crystal that could accommodate nearly 10,000 spectators. By the time Verity and Thorne arrived, guided by their assigned escort, the space was already filling with pilgrims from across the sector. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation, the murmured prayers and hymns creating a background hum that seemed to resonate with the architecture itself. Governor Kalfas greeted them at a private entrance, resplendent in formal regalia that combined imperial administrative symbols with religious iconography specific to Sanctus Lux. "Sister Verity, Magos Thorne, I'm delighted you could join us for this blessed event," he welcomed them with practiced warmth. "I've arranged seating in the official observation section, where you'll have an unobstructed view of the Silent Saint's communion." "Most generous Governor," Verity acknowledged. "We look forward to witnessing the full extent of the Saint's abilities." Calphas's smile remained fixed, but Verity noted a flicker of something, concern, apprehension, in his eyes. Today's ceremony will be particularly significant. The Silent Saint has indicated she has an important message to convey to all the faithful. Has she specified the nature of this message? Thorn inquired. The ways of the divine are mysterious, Magos, Calphas replied smoothly. But in previous ceremonies, her wisdom has guided planetary policy through several complex challenges. I have no doubt today's revelation will be equally illuminating. Their designated seats were indeed perfectly positioned, an elevated box overlooking the central dais where the ceremony would take place. As they were escorted to their places, Verity conducted a careful survey of the security arrangements. PDF troopers in formal dress uniforms stood at regular intervals around the amphitheater, while robed figures she identified as local enforcers moved discreetly through the crowd. Security presence exceeds standard parameters for religious events, Thorne observed quietly. Approximately 43% more personnel than regulatory guidelines suggest. They're anticipating something, Verity agreed. Or perhaps preparing for something. As the appointed hour approached, the amphitheater's lighting dimmed gradually until only the central dais remained illuminated, a circle of pure white light that seemed to hover above the floor rather than shine upon it. The crowd's murmurs faded to expectant silence. Confessor Marcus appeared first, ascending to the dais in formal ceremonial robes much more elaborate than those he had worn during their previous encounters. He raised his hands, and the assembled thousands rose as one. "Children of the Emperor," his voice boomed, amplified by the amphitheater's perfect acoustics, "we gather in his divine light to receive his wisdom through his chosen vessel. Open your hearts and minds to the truth that will be revealed." The ritual that followed was impressive in its choreographed precision, acolytes moving in complex patterns around the dais, censers releasing clouds of incense that caught the light in shimmering veils, choir voices rising and falling in ancient hymns that predated the heresy itself. And then, with a suddenness that sent a collective gasp through the crowd, the Silent Saint appeared. Unlike her simple presentation in the cathedral's inner chamber, here she had been transformed into a spectacle. Her white robes were now intricately embroidered with gold thread forming imperial symbols, and what Verity recognized as highly stylized blood angels iconography, disguised enough that most would not identify it, but unmistakable to one looking for the connection. More striking was the change in her physical appearance. The subtle luminescence Verity had observed before was now dramatically enhanced, her skin glowing with an inner light that cast shadows, despite the powerful illumination focused upon her. Her eyes, those unusual violet orbs, seemed to have darkened further, appearing almost black except for the gold flecks that now burned like tiny flames. "Biological modification accelerated since our previous observation," Thorne noted, his augmetic vision capturing details invisible to normal human sight. Cellular structure showing signs of hyperstimulation, consistent with combat enhancement pharmaceuticals. Verity felt a growing sense of dread. They were deliberately amplifying the saint's condition, pushing her modified physiology to greater expression, perhaps to enhance whatever display of power they had planned for this ceremony. The Silent Saint moved to the center of the dais, her movements possessing an inhuman grace that reminded Verity uncomfortably of Astartes' warriors she had seen in combat. That same combination of power and precision that made them seem more than merely human. Confessor Marcus knelt before her, his amplified voice carrying clearly to every corner of the vast space. "Blessed vessel of the Emperor's will, we await his wisdom. Speak to us through your sacred communion." The Silent Saint raised her hands, and the quality of light in the amphitheater changed, shadows deepening, bright points intensifying, creating an almost strobing effect that Verity recognized as designed to induce a mild trance state in susceptible observers. Then came the voice, not spoken aloud, but manifesting directly in the mind of every person present. Verity felt it bypass her ears entirely, resonating instead within her skull with perfect clarity. "Children of the Emperor, hear his truth through me." The mental voice was stronger than during their private audience, harmonics more pronounced, creating resonances that seemed to vibrate at the cellular level. Verity noticed many in the crowd swaying slightly, their expressions slackening as the psychic impact washed over them. The Imperium stands divided by darkness. The great rift bleeds the light from countless worlds. But the Emperor has not abandoned his children. The Silent Saint's physical form began to change as she communicated, subtle at first, then increasingly pronounced. Her stature seemed to increase, shoulders broadening, face elongating slightly toward more aquiline features. Most alarming, Verity glimpsed what appeared to be shadowy shapes forming behind the saint's back, indistinct suggestions of massive wings spreading wide. The time of reunion approaches. The scattered sons shall be gathered. The broken shall be made whole. Gene expression accelerating beyond predicted parameters. Thorn whispered urgently. Primarch characteristics manifesting physically. Verity's hand moved to her medical kit, fingers closing around the injector Thorn had provided. The Silent Saint was transforming before their eyes, the carefully engineered hybrid physiology responding to the psychic power she was channeling. In the crowd, the reactions were mixed, awe and rapture from most, who perceived the changes as divine transfiguration, but also confusion and even fear from some who sensed something was wrong. The PDF troopers had begun to shift nervously, hands moving closer to weapons. The angel's blood flows still. His sacrifice was not the end but the beginning. Through his tears, he speaks again. The mental voice had changed, layers peeling away to reveal deeper harmonics, masculine tones emerging beneath the feminine, creating a dissonance that was physically painful to experience. Verity saw blood beginning to trickle from the noses and ears of some spectators nearest the dais. And then she noticed something else. The Silent Saint's lips, moving silently as if trying to form words different from those being projected psychically. Her eyes, now almost entirely black with just pinpricks of golden light, darted frantically around the amphitheater as if seeking escape. She's fighting for control, Verity realized. The original host consciousness, it's still in there trying to resurface. On the dais, Confessor Marcus had risen to his feet, his expression shifting from religious ecstasy to concern as he observed the unexpected changes in the Silent Saint. He made a subtle gesture to robed figures at the periphery of the dais, medical personnel or perhaps handlers trained for this contingency. But before they could intervene, the Silent Saint's body convulsed violently, her back arching at an impossible angle. The shadowy suggestion of wings became more defined, and her face rippled, features flowing like wax near flame, sometimes appearing feminine and human, sometimes reshaping into a hauntingly beautiful male visage that Verity recognized with shock from ancient imperial iconography. Sanguineous, the face of the angel himself, trying to manifest through his genetic legacy. The mental voice fractured into competing streams, the manufactured persona, the original human host, and something else, something ancient and powerful that spoke with the weight of millennia. "Help me, too strong, cannot contain. The Emperor's plan UNFOLDS. My SONS must be guided from beyond. Please, I'm still here. Make it stop." The crowd was in turmoil now, some fleeing in terror, others falling to their knees in religious fervor, still others collapsing from the psychic backlash. The PDF troopers had drawn weapons but seemed paralyzed by indecision, unwilling to fire upon what many still perceived as a living saint. Governor Calphus had disappeared from his ceremonial position, Verity noted, a telling abandonment of his responsibilities at the first sign of crisis. "We must intervene," she told Thorn, rising from her seat. "The construct is breaking down. If the Primarch's genetic material fully activates within an unprepared host, catastrophic psychobiological cascade," Thorn agreed grimly. "Probability of mass civilian casualties, 97.3%. They moved quickly toward the dais, Verity's Hospitaller authority clearing a path through the confusion. On the stage, the silent saint had fallen to her knees, her body undergoing visible transformations, muscle mass increasing, bone structure shifting, skin taking on a golden hue that pulsed with internal light. Confessor Marcus stood frozen in shock, his carefully orchestrated ceremony collapsing into chaos around him. When he saw Verity approaching, purpose in her stride, he seemed to recover some of his composure. "Stay back," he commanded. "This is a sacred transformation. The angel returns to us." "This is a failing biological construct," Verity countered sharply. "Your saint is experiencing a catastrophic breakdown of genetic modifications. She needs immediate medical intervention." The competing voices from the silent saint had become a deafening cacophony in their minds. "Blood. I need blood to complete the transformation. Help me. It's consuming me. I can't hold on." The Emperor's light shines through the darkness. The faithful must prepare for the angel's return. The silent saint's head snapped up, those black and gold eyes fixing on Verity with terrifying intensity. With inhuman speed, she lunged forward, covering the distance between them in a blur of motion. Up close, the transformation was even more pronounced. Her face, a nightmarish blend of feminine human features and masculine Primarch aspects, her body straining against robes that now tore at the seams. "Sister," a voice gasped from that twisted mouth, the silent saint speaking aloud for the first time. "Help me, not what they said, not divine, experiment, weapon." Verity raised the injector, seeking a clear target zone on the rapidly changing anatomy before her. "I know," she said quietly, "and I will help you." The silent saint's expression shifted again, drifting toward the more angelic, inhuman features. "Blood of my blood. You cannot stop what is ordained." Her hand shot out, inhumanly strong, gripping Verity's throat with crushing force. Verity felt her feet leave the ground as she was lifted effortlessly. The silent saint's mouth opened, revealing teeth that had elongated into distinct fangs. With her remaining strength, Verity drove the injector into the exposed neck of the hybrid being, depressing the activation rune. The effect was immediate but not what she had expected. Rather than simply rendering the silent saint unconscious, the Mechanicus compound seemed to trigger a catastrophic rejection syndrome. The silent saint released her grip, staggering backward with a terrible cry that emerged simultaneously from her mouth and directly into the minds of all present. Her body began to break down visibly, skin cracking to reveal golden light pouring from within, muscle and bone structure shifting rapidly between human female and transhuman male configurations. Genetic stability collapsing. Thorn reported mechanical appendages extending to pull Verity clear of the disintegrating figure. Complete cellular rejection of both host and donor material. Confessor Marcus rushed forward, his face contorted with rage and desperation. "What have you done? The angel was returning to us." "What you created was never the angel," Verity gasped, her throat bruised from the crushing grip. "It was a perversion of his legacy, using his genetic material in ways never intended. The woman you sacrificed to create your saint is still in there, fighting for survival. On the dais, the silent saint had collapsed to her knees again, her body seemingly at war with itself. The golden light pouring from the cracks in her skin had intensified, creating a nimbus around her that forced everyone to shield their eyes. "I am both, and neither," the saint spoke, her voice alternating between feminine human tones and deeper, resonant masculine ones. "The vessel fails, but the message remains." She turned those black and gold eyes toward Verity, and for a moment there was a clarity there, as if all the competing entities within had found a momentary harmony. "Tell them the truth, not as they wish to hear it. The angel does not return through flesh. His legacy lives in deeds, not blood. The experiment was doomed from inception." The light emanating from the silent saint had become blindingly intense. Thorn's optical filters adjusted automatically, allowing him to observe what human eyes could not. "Cellular dissolution accelerating," he reported. "Energy readings consistent with total conversion of biological matter to pure energy." "Is there nothing we can do for her?" Verity asked, genuine compassion surging through her professional detachment. "The human host, she never chose this." "Negative," Thorn replied solemnly. "The process has progressed beyond reversibility. Complete molecular breakdown in approximately 30 seconds. The silent saint seemed to hear and understand this exchange. She smiled, a strangely peaceful expression on her transforming face. "I welcome the end," she said, her voice momentarily purely human again. "Better oblivion than existing as neither fully myself nor truly him. But remember what you learned here. The line between miracle and abomination is drawn not by technology, but by intent." With those final words, the silent saint's form became incandescent, forcing even Thorn to look away. There was a sound like crystal chimes amplified 1,000-fold, and then a thunderclap that shook the entire amphitheater. When they could look again, nothing remained on the dais but a perfect circle of crystalline material, like diamond dust arranged in the precise pattern of a human form with outstretched wings. 3 days later, Sister Verity stood on the landing pad of the spaceport, watching as final preparations were made for their departure from Sanctus Lux. The aftermath of the catastrophic ceremony had been chaotic, but had eventually resolved into an uneasy stability. The Inquisition had arrived with impressive speed, suggesting they had already been en route before Verity and Thorn had sent their emergency communication. Inquisitor Valkis of the Ordo Hereticus had taken immediate control of the situation, placing Governor Calphus and Confessor Marcus under arrest pending full investigation of the Project Messenger operation. Administrator Venn had quietly disappeared the night of the incident. Whether fled, arrested by the Inquisition, or silenced by those wishing to suppress the truth, Verity could not determine. "The Inquisitor has requested our continued presence during the investigation," Thorn noted as he joined her on the landing pad. "Yet our original instructions from Canoness Drusilla indicate immediate return and report. The Canoness's authority supersedes the Inquisitor's request in this specific case," Verity replied carefully, aware of potential monitoring. "Our orders were quite clear." In truth, Verity had received encrypted communications from the Canoness instructing them to return immediately, with specific orders to avoid detailed debriefing by the Inquisition if possible. This suggested that the orders of the Adepta Sororitas had their own interest in the Silent Saint phenomenon, distinct from the Inquisition's concerns. "The investigation will continue without our direct involvement," Thorn acknowledged, "though our observational data would have been valuable to their analysis." "We've provided comprehensive reports on what we witnessed," Verity pointed out. "The Inquisition has more than enough information to determine what happened here. Whether they would reach the correct conclusions, or publicly acknowledge them if they did, remained an open question. The use of preserved Primarch genetic material to create biological hybrids was knowledge dangerous enough that it might be suppressed entirely. The Silent Saint incident officially classified as a case of demonic possession or unsanctioned psyker activity. Their transport arrived with the distinctive roar of Imperial Navy engines, not the commercial vessel they had expected, but a sleek Aquila lander bearing the insignia of the canoness's personal guard. Clearly, their return was considered a matter of some urgency. As they boarded the craft, Verity took a final look at the spires of Lux Contemplatio, gleaming in the morning sun. The city appeared unchanged from when they had first arrived, yet she knew that beneath the surface, everything had been altered. The Silent Saint was gone, but the questions her existence had raised remained. Had the blood angels of the pre-heresy era truly intended for Sanguinius's genetic legacy to be used to create such beings? Was the project a genuine attempt to preserve the Primarch's wisdom for future generations, or a heresy-era plot that had lain dormant for millennia? And if the former, what did it suggest about the Emperor's own plans for his Primarchs beyond their obvious military applications? The hatch sealed with a pneumatic hiss, cutting off her view of Sanctus Lux as the craft's engines spooled up for departure. "Your conclusions regarding this matter appear unresolved," Thorn observed, his mechanical voice neutral. "Some questions don't have clear answers," Verity replied, "particularly those that touch on the Emperor's grand design. We're left to interpret fragments, like archaeologists reconstructing an ancient vessel from a handful of shards." "An apt metaphor," the Magos acknowledged. "Though in my experience, even fragmentary data can yield substantive conclusions when properly analyzed." Verity smiled faintly. "And what conclusion does your analysis yield, Magos Thorn?" The Mechanicus adept was silent for a moment, optical lenses adjusting as if focusing on something distant. "That the distinction between miracle and technology is largely semantic," he said finally. "The Silent Saint exhibited properties consistent with both divine intervention and advanced genetic science. Perhaps the Emperor's greatest miracle was the science he employed to reshape humanity's future." It was a surprisingly philosophical statement from a Mechanicus adept, verging on the kind of theological speculation more common among ecclesiarchy scholars than tech priests. "The Omnissiah and the Emperor are one," Verity quoted from the Silent Saint's own words during their first meeting. "Indeed," Thorn agreed, "a truth often forgotten in the artificial divisions between imperial institutions." As their craft broke atmosphere and prepared for warp translation, Verity reflected on the Silent Saint's final message. "The line between miracle and abomination is drawn not by technology, but by intent. Whatever the truth behind the Saint's creation, whether genuine attempt to preserve a Primarch's wisdom or heretical experiment, the intent had become corrupted over millennia of interpretation and reinterpretation. What might have begun as a safeguard had evolved into an obsession, a project willing to sacrifice an innocent human to create a vessel for genetic material never meant for such use. In the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, such was often the fate of even the noblest intentions. Time, fear, desperation, and dogma transformed enlightened plans into dangerous deviations from the Emperor's true vision. Yet even in that darkness, individuals like Verity and Thorn continued to seek truth, navigating the treacherous waters between blind faith and cold rationality, between unquestioning acceptance and dangerous doubt. As the craft prepared for warp translation, Verity found herself offering a silent prayer, not for the Silent Saint, whose suffering had ended, but for the Imperium that had created her. A prayer that someday, humanity might reclaim enough of the Emperor's wisdom to understand the difference between preserving his legacy and perverting it. "The Emperor protects," she whispered, the familiar phrase carrying new weight after all she had witnessed. "Through knowledge and preparation," Thorn responded, completing their shared litany. In the void between stars, their small craft vanished into the warp, carrying with it secrets that might never be fully revealed to the wider Imperium. Echoes of a silent saint whose true nature would remain known only to a select few, who dared to look beyond the comforting glow of blind faith into the complex shadows, where the Emperor's true plans might yet lie hidden. The end.